Welcome to Economics Happy Hour. My name's Matt,
And my name is Jadrian.
and we are thrilled to be with you here in March. And the exact date, we don't know because, well, it's not March when we're recording, but we believe it is March 14th when this is dropping. So the
That sounds
middle
about
of
right.
March,
Yeah.
almost the Ides of March. Uh, Jadrian, how is your semester rolling along?
It's rolling. This is always the point in the semester where I'm sort of in the thick of things. I'm right, sort of catching up on old stuff, grading things, editing the things I'm doing, trying to prepare for the end. So it's always around April that I get comfortable because I've updated
Yeah.
like homeworks and projects and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not there yet. I'm in the thick of it,
Yeah.
but it's
From
the end is near.
when this drops, those who have listened to the one that would be 4 weeks ago, in February 15th is coming out, will know we talked economics of cruising. When this one drops, I will be on that cruise. So when what we're going through now compared to right now, I'm in the middle of a lot of we're dealing CSB accreditation planning and travels and
Mhm.
um, you know, typical busy administration stuff, but
Dean stuff.
Dean stuff.
Dean
It's not
things.
it's not bad. What are you drinking?
I
This is good.
listen, I moved, so I'm still working through the fridge.
Nice.
I found in the fridge a
Ooh,
Voodoo Ranger Fruit Force Fruit Punch IPA.
very nice.
So weird
This is gonna
transition from the last beer I had, but
yeah. We're recording two in a day for those who are listening.
which will help with
And
Matt's beer.
yeah, so I'm going back to the Athletic Brewing Run Wild non-alcoholic IPA. It's a I had a beer earlier and it's trivia night, so I'm gonna have a beer later. But try to pace myself a little bit here. So
Matt, do they serve a lot of non-alcoholic beers like in a mixed six pack? Like if you were going to Wegmans, are there enough that you could put in six different
I doubt it.
non-alcoholic beers?
I doubt it. I don't go to Wegmans, and Pennsylvania's rules can be a little weird because you have to have the cafe there. But I
Yeah.
remember I first picked up this non-alcoholic beer by mistake when I was picking out all these one cans of beer
Yeah.
at a Trader Joe's in New York.
I I
And
wouldn't be surprised if I don't know that you're going to get six, but I wouldn't be
yeah,
surprised if there were three or four in a beer fridge that you could pick out as like a six pack so you could try
yeah.
different ones.
Fantastic article in the Wall Street Journal on Athletic Brewing Company. They are not sponsors. They should be. All of these beer places should be sponsors. But anyways, cheers.
Cheers. This smells delicious. Like Matt's probably watching if you're watching the
Hmm.
YouTube version of this, you just watched me smell this. It smells
Hmm.
like fruit punch. Like it smells so good. Wow, it
Life
smells
is
good.
short. Enjoy the smell of the beer.
I haven't tried it. Well, hold on.
Yeah. Uh,
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Okay, Voodoo Ranger. It's a fruit punch IPA. Like that's what it tastes like.
very cool.
Wow. That's oh my god, Matt, it's a 9.5%. I probably should have
Yikes.
picked a different one.
Okay.
That's really good. So far I'm gonna say first drink, first sips. That's really good. We'll see if it's still
Pacing
good in a little
ourselves.
bit.
Got to pace yourself on this one. So,
Hmm.
well, today we thought we would bring up a topic that's often brought up in political circles. I don't know that it's the hot topic at this exact moment, but that is the earned income tax credit. So, Jadrian, do you have a little bit of a summary of the earned income tax credit you could give to the listeners who may not know?
Yes. So I will say we could talk about why we picked this one. I'll say for two reasons. One is a recent thing has happened politically, and by recent, I'm gonna say recent when Matt and I are recording it, not recent whenever you're listening to this. But I think a second one that's probably more interesting is it's tax time for a lot of individuals. Your taxes are by the time you're listening to this, they're not due till April, but a lot of people do fill in their taxes in March, late March, early April. Some of you may qualify for the earned income tax credit. Um, it is, I think that at least the way that Matt and I have talked about it is I would say it's generally a bipartisan tax credit. It's got a lot of support on both sides of the aisle. It is a tax credit that you earn if you have a certain income threshold. And off the top of my head, I don't know those income thresholds, but for low and moderate income individuals or couples, basically, you can earn money as a tax credit, and you can actually earn more sometimes when you work more. So it's sort of an interesting system where if you're working a little bit, you're going to get a certain amount. If you work a little bit more and earn a little bit more, you might actually get a bigger refund. And then at some point, it does sort of go back to a normal tax bracket where as you earn past another point, it starts to go back down again. But the
Yeah,
idea is there's an incentive to work in some senses, depending on how low your income is.
it is specifically targeted to low income workers.
Yes, worker.
So that
Thank you. That's an important
Yeah,
part.
so by definition, you must be working to get the earned income tax credit, which makes it a little bit different than most. Some notes from the Tax Foundation that can be found at taxfoundation.org, right? The majority of the benefits go to those making under $30,000 a
Mhm.
year. So if you are working in a low income job, you are earning money, you can get a credit, which, uh, essentially can actually be a negative income tax, which is
Mhm.
part of the origin and part of why this has a bit of support in a bipartisan manner, as the negative income tax was one of the proposals. I don't know that it was he was the first person to do it, but Milton Friedman really helped to campaign for the idea of a negative income tax to as a poverty reduction tool.
Mhm.
And so the rationale on this, what do you see as the pros of the earned income tax credit versus perhaps some other forms of government assistance
Yeah.
for low income individuals?
So probably I would say the earned income tax credit is really interesting in the sense that like I think the popularity of it is really important. If you qualify for it, it's sort of an automatic qualification compared to a lot of other government assistance programs because it's sort of happening while you're filling out your taxes. If you're using something like TurboTax, it knows immediately if you qualify for it. Versus other means tested programs where you think about something like TAMP, for example, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. That's sort of like I would say that's the classic cash welfare system that most people think about when they think of welfare. A lot of those programs you have to apply for it, so you have to have your tax documents, you have to meet with somebody, you have to get it approved, then you have to wait. Like there's a big lag to
Yeah.
a lot of the other welfare programs, not with the earned income tax credit. And so one of the things that's really interesting about it that always has stood out to me as really interesting is it's that sort of automatic system that I think is really important because if we're designing these programs to help people, the goal is we need to make it seamless in that sense of like sort of that automatic qualification, not wasting money on the administrative side
Yeah.
of administering these other programs to get cash out. So I think it's in that sense, I think it's really interesting. I think there's some interesting things in the sense of incentivizing people to work versus the other ones where, as you earn more money, your benefits decrease, so you might not want to work more.
Yeah.
But I'd say probably the most interesting aspect of the program is really just sort of the speed at which it happens. That it is sort of an automatic I don't want to
Yeah.
call it a cash rebate. It's not exactly that, but like for a lot of people, they're going to get a chunk of money back because of this earned income
Earned
tax
income
credit.
tax credit. Yeah, I would agree. I do like that part. I will post an article here that Jadri and I just actually sent over to you that I was a little surprised until you think about it, that there's 1 in 5 who are eligible don't actually claim the credit.
Mhm.
And it probably goes by if you make a low enough income, maybe you don't do your taxes. Um, or you're not doing your taxes with the software, which I had not thought about until just now.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if it so there could be definitely the like not doing your tax like if it's low enough it's not worth the time sort of idea. You don't the likelihood you get audited is small. Um but
And I
I
do
my
believe
guess
there's
would
an
be
income
people
thresh.
but
There's a
people doing it by
threshold I
hand.
think you don't have to apply. You don't have
Yeah,
to.
that's true. I could imagine easily that if you're doing it by hand, you might not think about it, right? If you're
Yeah.
sort of doing the old version on paper,
Yeah.
if you have I would say if you have a very simple tax system, I mean there are you don't have to pay for This is where maybe we should have talked about TurboTax instead. Um, TurboTax
They are
would
not
like
a
you to pay.
sponsor of the show,
Yeah, no, they're
although
definitely not,
they,
especially after what I'm about to say.
yeah,
So you don't have, there's a free version of TurboTax that you do not have to pay for. They will pressure you to pay for TurboTax. And they're all the sort of new free tax filing stuff. But at the same time, I could see why somebody, if you have a relatively simple tax program, you don't earn a lot of money, but you work at one company, you get one W-2, you don't have investment accounts, you don't have like
yeah,
I do it by hand, it might be even easier and you're not bugged with the computer aspect of it.
sure, sure.
20% does seem high to me, but that could easily be the people who don't need to file taxes and who do it by hand.
Yeah.
I,
And
I think that's
maybe, I mean,
really
maybe some of the 20%, it's so little that it's not worth the time. I mean, dealing with the government is not always the easiest. So if we're talking about $30, it might not be worth it. So
which goes back to the problems with most of the other welfare programs. Are they're means tested, but they're generally application based, where you have to carve out a portion of your day to go meet with a caseworker
yep.
to prove that you qualify for this. But like, if we want these people to work, asking them to take time off of work to go then get
Yeah.
it creates
Yeah.
that burden. And so I think you sort of get, I would say, two benefits is that from a sort of government policy standpoint, it can cost you less to give out the same amount of money by sort of making it automatic. So it's actually sort of a savings efficiency type idea.
Yep. Yeah. And I completely agree and think that's probably the benefit that's not talked about enough of the earned income tax credit. As a society, right? If we have to have 10,000 workers for a particular welfare program that are people who have college degrees, they could be doing something else that's productive.
Mm-hmm.
If we could cut that down to 1,000, that's nine, just taking the money out of it, that's 9,000 people whose skills can be applied to making the world a better place in some other way, not
Yeah.
to monitoring whether somebody qualifies or not. So the automatic nature of this is valuable both for the time of the workers, their opportunity cost, which is, if you're making lower incomes, I mean, there's, I mean, time is valuable for absolutely everybody. And it might be, if you've got somebody with lower income, they've got kids to, maybe they have kids. I mean, all of the things that's incredibly
Those extra
valuable.
$20 matter, right?
Yeah.
Like those make a
So,
meaningful difference.
but let's not take time they have to take off of work or take away from whatever else. That's valuable, and it is also incredibly valuable to have fewer workers. I like that. And the concern I have on a lot of welfare programs, which this one doesn't in theory and in practice, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but if this is not taking away the incentive to work in theory, right? People are
In the
still
beginning. I
incentivized
mean,
to work.
at a certain point, it does. But the idea is
Well,
that once you hit that threshold, you
if
might
you
have
hit a negative income tax, yeah, I mean you reach you could lose it, but you're making enough money where it's
yeah.
offsetting. So yeah, instead of if you made, I mean, in theory, let's say you earned $20,000 and you would have gotten $1,000 back from an earned income tax credit. And I'm just completely
Mhm.
making up the numbers. Maybe if you earn 40,000, you get nothing back. So yeah, you're not getting the 1,000 back, but essentially if that's a 5% tax if that's all you're paying
Yeah.
in. So there's still an incentive to work, and at least with that specific tax. When we get to the drawbacks, I'll point out how the correlations with some other taxes. But that was a lot of what Milton Friedman didn't talk about earned income tax credit as much, at least in
Mhm.
the earlier years, but was very big on the idea of a negative income tax. And what he would say is get rid of every other anti-poverty program. Don't try to figure out if people need housing assistance or food stamps. Get rid of all of that
Yeah.
and provide income, if people, provide an income, and it's a negative income tax. If you're not earning above a certain level, the government would just pay you some money, and then you get to decide how that money is used. And the part of it was trusting people to make the
Mhm.
best choice for themselves with the money instead of saying, well, you must spend this amount on food or this amount on something else. And part of it wasn't taking away an incentive to work as long as you set up the tax rates right.
Yeah.
And part of it administratively, that's a lot of people the government doesn't have to pay, and then could be doing other things. So those were a few things that ties back to, I mean, kind of a classical liberal position on anti-poverty programs.
And I think that I want to highlight a portion of what you just said there because I think it's really important. Is this idea that people know best about what they need. And you and I have shared this before, right? We're very fortunate that we have not been in these positions where we've had to make these decisions, but I've seen friends and family who have had to go through these sort of situations of things like the food stamp program or WIC, and like just the mental stress associated with making sure that you're doing things right, of getting the right type of cheese and the right type of bread. Does this count or not count? That is paternalism to make is I'm I tend to be I'll say a little more liberal than Matt. Um, but even I look at that from a sort of a paternalism stance, and I'm like, what are you doing? That is such a waste of everyone's time. There's some bureaucrat who has to decide which type of mozzarella cheese is appropriate for you to purchase.
Yeah.
And you have to be standing in the store going, does this have the right percentage of milk fat for this to count? Just give them $5 and let them pick whatever cheese they would like to purchase. And I don't care if it's sliced Kraft American cheese. Like,
Yeah.
just let them go buy cheese. We would save, from an pure efficiency standpoint, we'd save so much time on both sides of this. And that time savings real for a lot of, and so we actually should probably mention the earned income tax credit is also really helpful for families. So there's levels that sort of ratchet up your rebate based on having kids. So it can be incredibly helpful in that sense. Giving parents back more time with their kids is a good thing.
Absolutely.
Generally, like, I'm going to assume that most people are good parents. There are definitely people who are not, but like, I think people who are going through this struggle of trying to make sure that they're taking care of their family, they're doing the
Yeah.
right thing. So giving them more time with their kids, or like you said, giving them the opportunity to go work and work a little bit more and earn a little bit more money for their family, I'm generally okay with.
All
If,
good.
as a society, we say this is the dollar amount we would like to give to people, I think the earned income tax credit is one of those ways to do it in
Yeah.
a really efficient way compared to the other ways.
So moving over to the drawbacks.
I have
What do
I
you?
have one that I'll share, but
Yeah.
I assume that there's going to be more on your side. So I can give you mine.
Go for
Mine's
it.
an easy one, but I like the earned income tax credit. So
Yeah,
maybe I
go
can go.
for it.
I'll go first on the easy side.
Yes.
Okay. My main drawback, and this might be on your list already, is if you are struggling financially, you need that money at other points in the year other than when you file your taxes. And so to get a lump sum back of a couple $1,000s, right? Or I'm gonna say a couple thousand. Maybe it could be thousands of dollars. To be able to spread that out over the year would probably have a much bigger impact on a lot of families, especially if you think about for a lot of families, July and August is a really tough time in terms of that back to school time period. You think about November, December, where electricity bills are higher, heating bills are higher. It'd be really nice to have some of that money probably in December, not so much in March and April. So my main criticism is sort of the lump sum that you get, and we're asking people to allocate that over an entire year. And I don't think that's fair to ask anybody to do,
Yeah.
especially people who need that income throughout the year. That's my main
Yeah.
criticism.
No, that's a really good one. And one I hadn't really thought of as much, to be honest, on, even for a negative income tax if it were to
Mhm.
work purely. And I would think if we moved away from everything else just to this type of system, I think that would have to be sorted out.
Yeah.
Mine, and I know we've talked about this a little bit before. The concern I have is not with this in theory, it's with it in practice, and it's combined with everything else.
Yeah.
So the earned income tax credit isn't on an island. I would love it if this is actually very similar to the argument I'd make for universal basic
Mhm.
income. Uh, I would love it if every single other government aid program simply went away and was replaced by the earned income tax credit. And I would put in the caveat. I think you're right. It has to be more monthly than
Yeah.
annual. The annual doesn't do any good if somebody's in June and
Mhm.
is needing, a particular program. But when this is combined with other programs, you still can have that disincentive to work. And I know I've given him a shout out before, but Jeffrey Dorfman, who was economist at Georgia, I think he might be at NC State now, actually, but came to campus when he was at Georgia and had done some pretty extensive studying and found that if you had a single mother who was earning 31,000 a year, because of also the other anti-poverty programs that were there, like we talked about food stamps, and perhaps the earned income tax credit and other things, earning an extra $1,000 would make her worse off because some of those programs would go away, and the earned income tax credit's part of these. That one is not as bad as the others, but in order for her to be better off, would have to get that income up to like $70,000, which is an incentive not to try to go after the promotions or the different job skills that could eventually make it sustainable at 75, 80,000, like these, you're kind of taking away the opportunity at these high salaries for individuals. And that's the part I don't like. And it's a bit of the cautionary tale I have. As a general rule, I like the idea of like the Pigovian tax on energy or like on gasoline if other taxes would be reduced. But I will not support those because I know enough about the history of the way these work. I don't believe our politicians will ever then cut another tax. Or if they say, oh, it's all going to be rebated. Yeah, the moment you have any sort of issue, the rebate's gone. So that's the drawback I have, and unfortunately, I don't see a good way around that drawback.
I don't have a good answer for it. And so I think my struggle is really going to be on the distribution. So I had a really great speaker who she either came to my crime course or my labor course. I don't remember off the top of my head. But Annalisa Packham is an applied microeconomist. She's just health, labor, crime, things like that, at Vanderbilt. And she came and talked to, again, either my crime or my labor course. I don't remember exactly which one. I'm fairly confident it's crime, but it could, when I explain her research, you'll see why it could be either one. And one of the things that she looked at was criminal activity based in, I want to say it was the Chicago metro area. Illinois had changed the way that they distributed food, the food voucher programs, the food stamp program. It used to be monthly. So you didn't always not everybody got it on the same day. But basically like everybody got it within a couple days at the beginning of the month. And then they switched it and they started to do it twice a month instead. And so basically what she looked at was she had some really interesting crime data that essentially in air, right? Because you can't really track the person, but basically in areas where they got lots of distributions of these welfare programs, that if you only got it once at the beginning of the month, at the end of the month, you saw this spike in like low-level crimes of like convenience stores, CVS's, things like that. And that basically, as soon as they pivoted to doing it twice a month, that essentially that dropped off. And the idea was people could spread out their money as as soon as you give somebody all of your money in the beginning of the month, you run out, and then you end up in this case committing crimes. But again, I want to make sure I'm very careful here. She was not able to see whether the recipients committed crimes. That is not the case here.
Sure.
However, they're linked together. So I want to be very careful in the way I phrase that. But I think it goes back to this point, right? This idea that if I just give somebody thousands of dollars in April and say, budget this for the year, you might need it. That's not fair to anybody. I would be guilty of wanting to spend a lot of that at the beginning too, and not recognizing how much I don't know what my December heating bill is going to be in April when I get this money back.
Oh, come on. What are you doing?
It was big. Matt, I'll tell you after we log off. My January bill, it was very cold here. It was cold everywhere.
Yeah, my January bill was not pretty.
That hurt, and all I could think of paying it was I just sat there and go, thank God I can afford to pay this, because I know that there are a lot of people who'd like that. Something like that would be a much worse situation. So I think my big holdup is that if we were to switch, like let's say, we imagine a scenario where we really do get rid of all of these other programs.
Yep.
How can we get money in the hands of people on a regular basis? And then
Yeah,
I
once
think
a
the
week
problem
or every other week. Yeah.
every other week or something. And then my problem goes back to, can we trust the federal government to deliver every other week to stuff? I don't know. I don't know that. I think a hiccup could really make things bad. This might be a book that you might enjoy reading. I read it a couple years ago. It's called Automating Inequality. So it looked at like three different areas of where just different tech companies have come to try to make things better and more
Hmm.
efficient. One of them is actually based out of Pittsburgh, and it talked about the child. I can't think of what it's called. Like social care work. Like when do we alert the authorities that a child might be in danger? So like what sort of metrics should we do? And basically what they collected all the data of like these are cases where kids had been abused and we reported it to the police. Here's all the data that we had, and they tried to work backwards to predict it. And then it sort of talked about this idea that like things do just happen, but it was like all these false negatives associated with it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think there was a case they studied Indiana and like their welfare system of just trying to automate the process to make it easier. But essentially, like the system would send an email that said, "Hey, you need to meet on Tuesday," but then it went to the spam folder because they sent out so many emails. And so then people missed their thing because they didn't get a phone call that they're used to.
Sure.
Then they didn't show up, and so then they didn't get their benefits, and then they had to wait 2 extra weeks. Like it's those sort of like I don't necessarily trust the distribution process. I think there needs to be a good way for that to happen. Maybe we
Yeah.
get one of those, then I feel better about it.
It's a general rule, and I don't trust. You ask, oh, I don't trust the federal government on, and I was about to say yes. It's not. I know there's a lot of wonderful workers for there, but there's bureaucracy and there's problems and all of
There's
that.
problems, and I think that especially when you think about how do we do. To be fair, there's millions of people who get a tax refund check, right? But they only have to do that a couple months out of the year. Can we automate that process every week, every 2 weeks?
Sure,
I don't know, right? Like
that's a good question.
that's a big ask.
Yeah.
Let me actually share, I guess, why Matt and I, or why I guess we're talking about this compared to other times. This will be really interesting. I assume that by the time that this comes out, I would hope that the Senate has looked at this. I guess I can't tell for sure whether this is actually accurate or not. But the reason that I brought this up to Matt and I said, "Hey, this might be something that we want to talk about," was that the House of Representatives, at least when we're recording this, and we really hope that in a month that this actually still goes through, but that when we recorded it, essentially the House of Representatives had passed their end of year bill for the earned incomes tax credit by like a very wide majority. So it passed the House of Representatives 357 to 70. And so again, I think it goes back to what we started with today. It is shocking is maybe not the right word, but it's generally a bipartisan program, which I think when you compare that to a lot of other welfare related programs or
Yep.
even entitlement programs, when you think about something like Social Security, I mean, we fight a lot about Social Security even of any of these welfare
Yep.
or entitlement programs. This one broadly has a lot of support on both sides. So it's a
Yeah.
really interesting program, and it's been around since the 90s. So
Yeah. So
it's sort of a cool program to think about, like in the sense that there is something that we generally all agree on.
yeah. So be curious for those who are listening. We'd love to hear your comments on what you think about the program. And did we miss anything? Should we be having Earned Income Tax Credit podcast number 2 in the future?
I'm
But
sure I'm very confident Matt and I forgot something. Like we probably forgot
I'm
something.
certain we did. I'll be curious to see what the listeners point out as what the most important thing we did forget was. But uh, pop culture on the earned income tax credit. Okay, there's nothing on that. Pop culture in general, pop culture on taxes.
But so Matt, how about we share a pop culture paper that we had teased months ago, and then
Yeah,
we have recently abandoned. So I may
that
have
sounds good. So
I may have switched my microphone.
you
I
still
might
sound
sound different.
you still sound perfectly fine. So No,
So
we had thought about doing a. Oh, and I still owe an email to Kim Holder. Sorry, Kim. You'll have gotten it by the time you hear this, but um, we had talked about doing a uh, economics from Taylor Swift songs paper and looking through a number of songs. And then by the time we talked about it, and we know of three other groups of people, all of whom good, good economists who are working on similar topics, maybe not exactly the same, but close enough. And we thought it's not there. I actually have a number of PowerPoint slide decks though created with the lyrics. So I might still actually try to take some of them and throw up a few onto YouTube or Critical Commons because there is a lack of those there, and people would use those. So
Matt, let's write a Monday Morning Economist newsletter. We've got the
sounds
start
fun.
of something.
Yeah.
We've got some lyrics that we're ready to put out there, and so if we're not going
We
to write
could
a
get it. We could
paper,
actually get a couple songs posted onto Critical Commons for people to watch along too at the same time. So that
let's do
sounds
that. Let's leverage our newsletters because we're not gonna end up writing this paper. Matt and I
nope.
have been sitting on this, and then over like the past week, I have just seen this group of people have a paper. This company has a paper. This
Yep.
person
Yep.
has this full set of lesson plans, and Matt
Yep.
and I go, no, we're not doing this. We're we're not going to be the fourth person in line. Given that they're announcing stuff, that means they have stuff done. Who
Correct.
knows how many other people are working on things and just don't have it done yet?
Yep. Yep. I did. Did I ever? Last podcast you brought up one that you had talked about before. So if I bring up another, I've talked about. Have I talked about the Family Ties episode where Alex Keaton teaches preschoolers on this?
I don't know, only because like I do know this, like I
The
know this
clip.
scene. I know the
Yeah.
clip because like I don't watch a lot of Family Ties, but I like of the Family Ties that I watch,
Yeah.
I know
So
this
if
scene.
you've seen if I've talked about it before, forgive me, but there is a tax scene where Alex teaches preschoolers.
We have
And
we talked about income taxes last year.
okay, so that one's in there. So I won't, but it's still a great clip. So we'll still highlight it in the show
Let's
notes
do it
again.
again. We have new listeners, right? There's people who have not
So
listened last year. Tell
he,
us about the scene.
he's teaching preschoolers about starting a business. And the whole scene is fascinating because it goes through many things on starting a business. But at the end, he says, "Oh, and you'll want to hire a business manager to help avoid paying your taxes." And this is to a group of 3 and 4 year olds. And one of them asks, "What's a tax?" Which Alex Keaton says, and I don't know, I might know it verbatim. I've seen it enough. A tax is a hairy, horrible, liberal monster with big teeth. And the only way to stop the terrible tax monster is with a Republican. And then he asks who wants to be the Republican, and they all run in. And I always preface before I would show that Michael J. Fox in real life was much more on the left, playing somebody
Yeah.
on the right. But the whole scene is just pretty funny, and he's a great actor. So it's about the closest taxes scene with taxes that I know from pop culture. So
I wasn't expecting you to taxes. I was trying to find something on welfare.
okay,
I didn't even think about a taxes one. I'd say probably the best example I have in the taxes section is just the not Adam Ruins Everything, but his like news show, The G Word, which I think
yep,
is super interesting. Just from what does the government do that you don't realize they do, and it talks a lot about the TurboTax stuff. And I think he does have an Adam Ruins Everything clip of just sort of the rent seeking that goes on between like tax preparation companies for the federal government not to provide taxes. In a lot of other countries, the government just says, "This is how much you owe us," because they already know our income. Like they know a lot of our income. And so in a lot of other countries, it's, "Hey, we did your taxes for you. We think you owe this much. Please tell us if we're wrong." But we
and if
don't do
you're
that in the
yeah, and
United
you could
States.
just sign off, say, "Okay, that's right,"
Yep, sounds
and save
good.
a
That's
lot
fine.
of time.
Right, my Virginia Tech they report my W-2 to the federal government. They know the bulk of my income.
Yep.
The banks definitely report my income. So it's interesting from just sort of a rent seeking sort of argument. So maybe I'll throw that in there as my pop culture. I'll say Adam Ruins Everything has a story about rent seeking of tax preparation companies.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Well, thank you to everybody for listening again. We appreciate everything. If you liked it, please give us 5 stars and leave a comment, share with a friend, all of the good stuff. We are not monetized at this moment. The reason we do this is we love sharing economic education. So if you wanted to help support us, the biggest way you could support us is through sharing,
Yes,
through five
absolutely.
stars, and that might help get this in front of other people. So thank you, though. We do appreciate everybody who listens, especially to the very end of the episodes, like right now. So,
I almost made it. I'm gonna finish this as I have dinner. So that's my plan. I'm gonna try to
very
save a little
cool.
bit for
Very
dinner.
cool. Well, Jadrian, great to talk to you again, and thank you to everybody. Cheers.
Cheers, Matt. I'll see you next time.
See you next time.
This is delicious, but at 9.5%, I can't. I can feel myself. I can.